She came off the cloud as a man in a spacesuit on a dead planet, alone, no sign of life in any direction, just red rock and silence and a backpack that was full of what appeared to be research tools. His mission was to bring that planet back to life, and he did. By the time he was done, there was a waterfall, lush green vegetation, flowers, and he said that ships were arriving from across the galaxy, carrying people home to a world that had just finally been given back to them. He sat beside the water and left before they even arrived. His mission was complete. When I was young, 5, maybe 6 or 7, I used to see people in my bedroom at night. And it wasn't really frightening to me, at least not in a way that I understood really should have been frightening at the time. It was more like, when you look directly at something that's bright, like the sun, and then you look away, and then there's this impression that is left in your eyes, the shape of it kind of burned in. And then when you close them, you can still see it. It was like that, but figures in the dark that were static and not moving, almost like photographs. And they would often be wearing old period clothing from another time and place, something older, something that definitely didn't belong in my bedroom in the middle of the night. I would lie there, squinting and blinking into the dark, trying to see and figure out if what I was seeing was actually there or not. And sometimes I would even work enough courage up to forcefully whisper, "Mom," just to see if it was her in the doorway. And maybe I possibly somehow not recognized her. That was never the case. I told my mom about this when I was a child, at least I'm pretty sure I did. But I brought it up again a couple of years ago, and she looked at me and said, "You did? Why didn't you ever say anything to me about it? I didn't know that." And I realized I probably most likely had said something, but she probably heard it the way that parents usually hear things from children at bedtime. Not as a way to dismiss it, but it's more the way that parents process something when they don't yet know what it might mean. And it could be a child's imagination, maybe a dream, or something that was just needed to reassure them that everything would be okay. My grandmother raised me during the days when I was very young and my parents were working, and we would do these puzzles together at the kitchen table almost every day. It was our routine. And there were a few times that I can remember, maybe twice, that it sounded almost like the front door had opened. Footsteps came inside, and someone continued walking down the hallway towards the rest of the house to the bedrooms. I would look up, somewhat confused, and my grandmother would just glance toward the hall and say, "Oh, it's just Terry coming for a visit," and then just go back to the puzzle. Terry was my aunt, and she had passed decades before I was old enough to really even know who she was. My grandma said it just so plainly, so without alarm. "Oh, it's just Terry stopping by," was the most ordinary thing in the world to her. And because it wasn't frightening, or because she wasn't frightened and just went back to the puzzle, I just kind of followed suit. I wasn't frightened either. And it was always something just that happened sometimes. It also happened again when I was a teenager visiting them later. And by that time, it didn't faze me at all. I didn't think about any of this as really unusual until I started doing this work, until I sat with hundreds of clients and began to realize and understand how many people have had these types of experiences. Maybe a door in their family that was always slightly open. And no one really ever knew it was unusual because there wasn't anyone that treated them as unusual. It's just the way that things were until someone in their life pointed out that not everyone's grandmother, for example, calmly announces that a deceased relative has stopped by for a visit. I grew up in that house, and my mom grew up in a version of the same thing, the same environment. So when I tell you about the session that I did with my mom, the one that became this episode, I really want you to know who she is before I take you into it. She isn't someone who necessarily discovered her gifts later in life. She isn't someone who really needed to be convinced that any of this was possible. And she has always known. And she moves energy in the work that she does. She does healing work, and she's a massage therapist and does quantum touch with decades of experience. And she is known for a long time that she can work with more than just the physical body when she touches people. During her training, in fact, she told me that her senses were so heightened that she was able to move wind chimes. So after her session, when I shared something with her, something that her higher self had revealed about the way that she sometimes reaches for things as though she expects them to come to her. She didn't really look surprised. She more looked recognized, and she said, "Oh my God, I do that. I've always done that, but I never thought about it enough to care." So she knows what she is, and she always has known. So the question that she was going to ask wasn't really whether her gifts are real. It was something that was much more older and specific than that, something that had been running underneath everything in our family for a very long time. But I didn't know that yet when she came off the cloud. My mom came into her session with questions. Her health, thyroid issues that had followed her most of her life, her gifts and whether she was using them fully, a dream that she'd been carrying that she wasn't really sure what to do with, and whether she and I had shared lifetimes before. She came off the cloud and landed on sand, not soft, pale beach sand. It was a red desert floor of a world that had been emptied long ago. Ancient rock formations rose in every direction, enormous, the kinds of geological structures that take millions of years to build. They were still standing. Everything else was gone. No water that she could see, no movement anywhere. The silence of a place that used to hold life and has been without it for a very long time. She had a body, young and healthy and male, and she was wearing a silver bodysuit with a clear globe as a helmet, boots, and gloves. And when she described them, she noticed something: no seams, no visible fastening, no zipper, no way of putting it on or taking it off that she could identify. She carried a backpack filled with research tools. This was her purpose. She knew it the way that you know something that has always been true. I asked if she thought she was on Earth. She thought she was, but when I asked about a time frame when things had happened, how long ago, the question didn't land in the way that I expected it to. Past, present, and future, those constructs simply just didn't apply from where she was. She wasn't really confused when I asked her, but she was just somewhere where those categories didn't exist. So I decided to stop asking about time. What she did know, the earth had suffered an extreme drought, an aftermath that was so complete that everything living had to leave somehow. Some left, some were taken, some stayed and didn't survive. I asked her to show me where she lived or stayed. She saw some structure that was smooth, no visible lines, no joints, no indication of how it had been built and what it was made from. No other structures nearby, no windows, no other people, no doors. I asked if she had built it. Yes. I asked, "How did you build this?" She said, "With my mind." She had thought it into existence, manifested it through her intention. And then she said something that stopped me. She said she was the structure and the structure was her. She could feel it in a way. And the building she made was aware of her being next to it, inside it, and it was aware of her being aware. Two forms of recognition against what we would normally call the boundary between a person and a thing or a place. I asked her to go inside. There was nothing, no furniture, no objects, no evidence of habitation in any form that we would recognize at least. I asked why it was empty, and she said, "Things only appear when I need them, when something is required." She thinks it into being when it isn't needed anymore, it doesn't exist. I asked if she was happy. She took a few moments, not the pause of someone searching for the right word necessarily. Then she said, "I am content." Not happy, not fulfilled, not moved by her own presence on a dead world that she was working alone to restore, just content. She was alone. She had been alone for must have been an enormous span of time that existed outside any timeline she could locate, and she was content. I held that answer and moved forward. I asked if there was a time when she had completed her research, hoping she would answer. She said yes, so I moved her forward to that moment. She was no longer standing on the red desert floor. Instead, she was sitting beside this beautiful pool of water with the waterfall behind her, surrounded by vegetation so lush and green and alive that it stood in complete contrast to everything that had come before it. The sound of the water moving, the quality of air that belongs to a place where things grow without effort because the conditions are finally perfect. She had removed the helmet. She didn't need the suit anymore. I asked where she was. She said, "This is the new Earth." And then she said, "People are coming back now." I asked, "How are they traveling back?" She said, "By ship and by thought." Some of them knew how to use the same abilities that she had, the ability to move through pure intention, and they were using it to return. Others were arriving on vessels, crossing distances that made the word far feel entirely insufficient. S- Let's stop for a moment here and picture what she was describing. A planet stripped of all life, red rock in silence as far as anything or anyone could see, far longer than any human sense of time could really account for. And now, beautiful waterfall, green, alive, and abundant, ships arriving from across the galaxy, people traveling home by just thought and returning to a world that had been given back to them by a being who worked alone in a seamless suit on a dead red earth until the work was done. This is what came through my mom quietly in her own voice on an ordinary afternoon. I asked if she was proud of what she had accomplished. She paused and she said, no, it was her purpose. It was complete. She wasn't proud. Pride would have actually required a relationship to the outcome that she was living in, something that stood apart from the work and measured itself against it. She had been something closer to more of a pure instrument. The mission and the being who carried it were not two things connected by emotion. They were one thing. And when the one thing was finished, it was simply finished. I asked if she had died. She said no. I asked if she was still beside the waterfall. She said no. I completed my mission. I am back home. She had simply left. When the work was done, there was no reason to stay. She didn't need to be there to greet the people when they returned. The arrival wasn't part of her portion of the work. It wasn't her responsibility, so she returned to source without dying, without ceremony, without waiting to see what she had made and how people would react. I asked if she had worked alone. She said no. She actually had been part of a team. Others had taken on the same mission, each carrying their own portion and returned when their portion was complete. We are, I've been told across many sessions, the only beings for whom what I am feeling and how I feel about this are legitimate and real questions. Other forms of consciousness and life don't carry that particular weight. Emotion and the human experience can confuse us, slow us down, keep us circling around the same rooms long past the moment when moving forward was possible. The being on that planet understood what emotions were without being inside them, completely clear, completely purposeful, completely alone and content. After that lifetime, the higher self brought forward something else, another lifetime, a different room, a different time. She was a healer. And I want to be specific about who she was. If you've watched other episodes, the healers more outsiders. But in this lifetime, she was known, she was trusted, and she had a reputation that had been built over years of work. And she was the one that people brought their most difficult problems to. Wealthy families, powerful families, when they needed someone and they had already tried what mainstream world hadn't been able to help with. They came to her and she occupied the center of something, not the margins. She wasn't an outsider, someone the community didn't believe in. A powerful couple eventually came with her son, and she did everything that she knew how to do. She brought forward everything she had, and the child died. What followed wasn't private loss. The couple had resources and standing and a grief that needed somewhere to go. She was the obvious destination. And the truth was simply that a child had died, that she had tried to save, and it was the case that these things happened. And the truth wasn't what was needed. What was needed was a cause, someone to blame. And she was the cause. The community that had trusted her withdrew, not in a single moment, but in the slow accumulation of doors being closed, greetings not given, the cold of being invisible in a place that used to see you clearly. She had been the person people came to, and now she was the person that they passed without looking at. She was shunned. She was pushed out of the life that she had built for herself. And she absorbed it. The grief of the couple, the withdrawal of the community, the verdict of people who just needed her to have done something wrong because the alternative, that a child can die despite everything, that care and knowledge and genuine effort are sometimes simply not enough. That was too frightening for them to hold. She began to question herself in that life, her gifts, her abilities, the confidence she had carried for her whole life. The external judgment became internal for her. The voices of the couple, the community, the cold withdrawal, they moved into her. They started sounding like her own thoughts, her own voice. She locked her heart in a quiet way that follows when doubt has been absorbing long enough that it starts to feel like knowledge. Now, my mom, she was the middle child, and her older sister was 20 years old when she had died. Christmas Eve, a party, something that happened that was never fully resolved. My mother at the time was 11. Her parents shut down after that for a while. The grief was too large for them to hold and still function. And someone had to function. Someone had to keep things moving forward. Someone had to take care of her younger sister and hold the shape of a family that had essentially lost its center. My mom chose to be that person, not because she was forced to, because the situation asked and she answered. She had played football in the neighborhood with kids. She had also been the one who beat up her younger sisters and other kids' bullies on the playground. She was always the one who just kept going when keeping going was the only available option. She was 11 years old. Feelings got in the way of what needed to be done then, so she put them somewhere. And somewhere became so familiar that she just stopped noticing it had been a choice. Two locked doors, different keys. In one, a healer whose gifts were turned essentially against her by other people's grief. She had something taken from her. In the other, in this life, a girl of 11 who decided in a moment of real need that she didn't have room for what she was feeling. She gave something away. Neither of them was necessarily wrong in their moment. Both of them were carrying the consequences forward. The being on the dead planet, the one who sat beside the waterfall, he had built and felt nothing in particular about it. He wasn't showing my mom a cautionary future. He was showing her the logical destination of a path that had been running since she was 11 years old. What it looks like when mission completely displaces feeling. When I am content is the fullest answer available. My mom sat inside that room, felt it from the inside, and came back to her own body with something unlocked that had been closed since before either of us could remember. The higher self healed her thyroid. Her hands moved to her throat without any instruction from me. Something was being released, not just from this lifetime, but from the weight of two different kinds of locking across more time than this conversation can account for. The thyroid, the voice, the place in the body where we hold what we haven't been able to say. After the lifetimes, my mom or I asked the higher self about a dream she had. She had dreamed of someone she had a complicated history with, someone who passed years before, and in the dream, they were in a truck driving together. And she was the driver, and he was in the passenger seat. And he told her he was sorry for how things turned out, that he would be willing to have another lifetime with her if she wanted. She had woken up certain it was real. Then the day moved forward and she had filed it away with everything else that she didn't quite know what to do with. The higher self confirmed it without hesitation that the dream was real. He had been there. The dream wasn't the mind playing tricks or processing what it couldn't hold while awake. It was contact, a genuine visit from someone who had crossed over and found from the other side a clarity he hadn't been able to hold while he was still inside a human life. When someone who has passed comes back with an acknowledgement, I see it now. I understand what I couldn't understand then. I'm sorry. They aren't asking to be excused. They're offering a view from a place where fear has fallen away, where the whole picture is visible in a way it simply wasn't from inside the confusion of being human. He wasn't asking her to excuse anything. He was saying, from here, I can see what I see is love. And I'm sorry the fear kept me from showing that more clearly when I had the chance. My mom had been carrying something she was never supposed to carry, something that was said in passing that she had held and not known what to do with. And then he was gone. And the question that followed her ever since had been speaking in her own voice, so familiar she could barely distinguish it from her own. The higher self was clear. She was never responsible for what she couldn't have known. The weight that she had been carrying wasn't honoring anyone. It was the old mechanism again. Grief looking for somewhere to land, finding her absorbing it as her own. The external became internal again, as it had in the healer's lifetime, as it had in the girl who put her feelings away on Christmas Eve and kept moving forward. The same wound, a new address. And then the dream, him in the passenger seat saying he was sorry, was the specific answer to a specific internal accusation that had been running for years, for lifetimes. He said he was sorry, which also meant it was never yours to carry. I've been told across many sessions that we have forgiveness wrong, not slightly, fundamentally. We've been taught it's something you extend outward, a release that you essentially grant to someone else, one that requires them to deserve it or at minimum just acknowledge what happened. And because of that, framing it feels more like a type of surrender, like saying what happened was acceptable and excusable when it wasn't. That's not what forgiveness is. The version the higher self points towards has almost nothing to do with the other person. It's the release of fear that was never serving you, the laying down of a weight that you picked up in a moment of pain. and carried forward because you didn't know you were allowed to put it down. Love and forgiveness are the same thing, two sides of the same coin. And the higher self returns to this again and again across different sessions, different clients, different stories. And it's not meant to be comfort, it's a fact. And the fact remains that fear stops running when we forgive. My mother went into that session as someone who had learned early at 11 years old on Christmas Eve that feelings got in the way of what needed to be done. She had been putting them somewhere ever since. And the session showed her where that path leads when it runs its full course, a being alone on a dead planet, a mission completed in complete silence, a waterfall, a paradise, ships arriving from across the galaxy, and no particular feeling about it. Content. She came back to her own body with something unlocked that had been closed for a very long time. The dream in the truck was real. He was there. He could see more from where he was than he ever could from inside the fear and confusion of a human life. And what he saw, clearly enough to cross whatever distance separates where he is from where she was sleeping, was love, simple, offered without conditions. That's what crosses over every time. And then toward the end of the session, something happened that I wasn't quite expecting. Her higher self mentioned my mom had always told me I would make a great teacher. I asked about that, partly because I was curious and partly because I had spent years wondering if the roads I had taken, the teaching career, the counseling program I stepped away from, all of it, I wanted to know if they were wrong turns, whether I had missed something. There was a smile. Her higher self said, she was right, just not in the way that either of you understood. I had been her teacher before, a spiritual teacher across lifetimes. And there are lifetimes where she has been mine. I sat with that for a long time after the session, and it made sense. And I'm still sitting with it. The child who whispered mom in the dark, the son who spent years wondering if he was on the wrong path, the practitioner sitting with or across from his mom watching her go somewhere extraordinary. It was never a wrong turn. It was always just preparation. She knew that before I did. She always has. Before I close, something to carry rather to answer. Think about the fear underneath something that you've been calling maybe guilt, something that you've been calling regret. Not necessarily the story around it, the fear itself, the specific thing you're afraid would be true about you if you stopped holding yourself responsible. Because that's where the door is. And the door was never locked from the outside. One thing that I thought about since this session, the suit she was wearing, no seams, no visible way of putting it on or taking it off. And at the time, I didn't think much of it. I thought it was curious. And I've come to understand it more since the accounts from people who have worked in and around recovered technology that didn't originate here, of suits and materials that behave the same way, not separate from the being wearing them, but rather an extension of the being, the same principle as the structure that knew my mom was there, the same principle as thinking something into existence. The boundary between self and what surrounds the self was different in that lifetime. I don't know what that lifetime was. I don't know if she lived it or accessed it or something else entirely that we don't have language for yet. What I do know is that she took herself there, and whatever she found there was exactly what she needed to receive and what came after it. That's enough for me, for now. This is One Door, Many Rooms. I'm Jason Tempinski. In the next episode, I want to tell you about a session that showed me what it looks like when a soul refuses to be defined by what the world tried to make of her. A woman who put on a suit of armor and walked out to meet the army anyway, and what her lifetime revealed about the constraints we're still carrying from rooms we're no longer locked inside. When you're ready for your own story, I'd be honored to sit with you. The link is below. New episodes every week. I'll see you in the next room.